Okay, this is take 2 of Fats Are Disgusting or Land Whales Incorporated, brought to you by me. It's taken a very long time to gather all of the information for this because you talk about a rabbit hole that just goes on forever, okay? Alice in Wonderland has nothing on this, okay? So, and then also beyond that, trying to figure out how to explain it all in a clear and coherent way, which, if you've watched any of my stuff, is a reoccurring problem with me, but I'm trying, all right? So, this is my mini dissertation on how the body positivity movement and the rise of Ozempic and weight loss drugs are all tied together, one and the same, bedfellows, and they want you fat and unhappy. All right? So, to start off, who are our key players here? Well, we have our two major GLP-1 producers, which are the Eli Lilly company, also known as just Lilly, LLY on the S&P, and Novo Nordisk, which we're all very familiar with now because of their really successful marketing campaign for Ozempic. And so those are our two major drug producers. Then we also have the National Association for Advancing Fat Acceptance. And then some of our supporting cast are Procter & Gamble, BASF, which is one of the, I think it's the largest global chemical production company. It's based in Germany. Then there is Dow DuPont, Cargill, and Koch Industries. So, and special mentions are the Rockefeller University, Harvard, and Massachusetts General Hospital. No, you do not. No, come up here. Get out of here. Get out of here. Get out of here. Get out of here. Go, go, go. Come on. Bird, bird, bird. Get up here. Just a pest, okay? She sees food on the counter and then she has to go get some, all right? Just being a pest. Anyways, so Massachusetts General Hospital, the American Heart Association, and the National Heart Institute, now also known as like the National Heart Lung whatever Institute. Yeah, way to go. Good job, yeah. So, before we start, one would think that all of this would only go back to, maybe 1969 when NAFA was formed, or maybe the 80s when GLP-1s were first discovered. But no. As a matter of fact, we have to go all the way back to like 1850 and the demise of the whaling industry. Now, why the whaling industry, you might ask? Well, in the 1850s, we saw a major change from the use of whale and animal-based fats as primary lighting oils to the advent of kerosene and petroleum-derived products, right? So it basically killed the whaling industry. It also, whaling is not sustainable, just as an industry in general. So it was only a matter of time. But with petroleum and petroleum-based products, you get things like kerosene, which are, much more easy to produce. They have a lot wider application, and they're not dependent on whales. So, and then beyond that, you also have, with the advent of the industrial age, the rise of machinery, right? And with industrial machinery, you need industrial lubricants. And you can't just use animal-based fats for that either. The industry had to look for alternatives for industrial lubricants, which is where we get hydrogenated oils from. Now, that brings us all the way up to 1911 and our lovely pair of gentlemen known as William Procter and James Gamble. Now, William Procter was a candle maker, and James Gamble was a soap manufacturer. And they met and married, fortuitously for them, two sisters in Ohio. And their father-in-law encouraged them to start a soap and candle making manufacturing company, which, as we know, based off of the prevalence of P&G today, was highly successful. So, in 1837, they found Procter & Gamble, and in 1858 to 1859, they secured the rights to supply the Union Army with soap and candles, which then introduced basically the nation to Procter & Gamble products. In 1880, they market Ivory soap, being the first floating soap, and then in 1911, they produce Crisco. Now, Crisco, I'm sure some of you know, but some of you don't, was developed as an alternative to animal-based fats, and it was to be used in machine lubrication, industrial manufacture of soap and candles. Okay? Because with the advent of the machine age and no longer using candles as a primary source of light, candles became a luxury product and thus had to have a luxury. They had to be able to be marketed in a luxurious way, which means they needed to be smokeless, they needed to be scentless, and to have a uniform look to them, which is why, and with soap, they needed a affordable, fat-based material to mass manufacture soap. So around the beginning of the 1900s, Procter & Gamble started looking into the hydrolyzation process of producing seed oils. And it started with cottonseed. And why cotton? Well, cotton is one of the primary textile plants in the world and has been forever. And within the United States at that time, cotton was the number one textile plant, and with the advent of the cotton gin, one of the things that was left over were cotton seeds. So, as a byproduct of the cotton industry, they started developing cottonseed oil and cottonseed oil production processes. Procter & Gamble refined that and used that byproduct to produce their soap, and then they started mass manufacturing and marketing that product beyond just soap and candles as Crisco. So, and I should note that Crisco is no longer owned by Procter & Gamble. They sold it in the 90s after there was the backlash in the 1990s of the actual health benefits of Crisco, which now we know that hydrogenated oils, there's nothing healthy about them at all, and there's actually nothing healthy about seed oils, full stop, period, despite what the large corporations who manufacture them might want you to think. Okay? So, in 1911, Procter & Gamble starts producing Crisco. All right? They also go on to create the TV genre of soap operas as a mass marketing scheme. They also, in 1955, start Crest toothpaste with fluoride, which we all know how great fluoride is now, right? And in 1996, they have Olestra, which if you don't remember, if you're too young or you don't remember, Olestra was a fat alternative cooking oil that P&G made that, made you shit your britches. So it's no longer used anymore, or at least it's not supposed to be. But there you go. Now, and what are their most common ingredients in all Procter & Gamble products outside of water? Sodium lauryl sulfate, which is a surfactant, cleaning agent, and polyethylene glycol, which is a petroleum-based product, both which are produced by BASF, which again, largest chemical production company in the world, second only to, I want to say, Dow Chemical Company, and oh geez, what's the other one? Where you at? Ooh. What's that company? I need a name. Sigma Aldrich, which is a subsidiary of the Merrick Group, which is another large global chemical production company. All right, so that's Procter & Gamble. Now, how does that tie in to, well, we know how that ties to the whales, right? The whaling dies, Procter & Gamble comes up with Crisco, 1911, and they successfully market it and as the replacement to animal fats as a cooking substitute that has alleged health benefits starting in 1911, which is 10 years before the successful commercial production of insulin. All right, which brings us to our second, if not the most important player in this game right now, when it comes to GLP-1s in the body positivity movement, which Crisco and BSFA and the sort of sodium lauryl sulfates and all of that, we'll come back to that. They have a role to play. BASF is one of those secret ones that's just got their fingers in all kinds of pies. Now, Eli Lilly was established in 1876 by Eli Lilly. It is currently a $45 billion company. Procter & Gamble is twice that size at $84 billion. But Eli Lilly, pharmaceutical company founded by Eli Lilly. And its primary products right now are Mounjaro and Zepbound, which are two GLP-1 products that were approved so Mounjaro was approved by the FDA in 2022 and Zepbound in 2023. However, that is not the first GLP-1 product that Eli Lilly works on. So let's rewind the clock on Eli Lilly and see where we're at. Because some of their other successful pharmaceuticals were insulin, barbiturates, methadone, Prozac, Cymbalta, and Zyprexa. So lots of things that make you depressed and unhappy. Okay, and incidentally, cause diabetes. And now why is that suspicious? Well, because Eli Lilly is the first company to successfully commercially produce insulin. Now, how did they get there? Well, in 1923, Eli Lilly starts the first commercial scale production of insulin. They were able to do this, and Eli Lilly became really successful because they were the first pharmaceutical company to successfully encapsulate pharmaceutical products. So Eli Lilly was able to grow his company from 1876 to 1923 through, I think something like 2,800 different products, one of which was a really successful malaria pill, but his encapsulation process is really what took Eli Lilly from a small independent company to a large corporation. And then in 1923, they started working on commercial insulin. So, commercial insulin. And a fun fact, in 1934, they create secobarbital and launch that onto the market. And that drug, a couple decades down the road, in 1969, the same year that the National Association for Advancing Fat Acceptance was founded, secobarbital kills Judy Garland in an OD, and a year later takes the life of Jimi Hendrix, also in a secobarbital OD, because people were taking it recreationally, because what's not fun about that? And in 1947, they are the first distributor of methadone, which is a synthetic opioid. So, Eli Lilly, wonderful, wholesome company. They diversify into agrochemicals and cosmetics in the 1950s. They go public in 1952, which is important. And, they do Prozac, which is one of the first depression medications. It's not an SSRI, I think it's an SNRI. And then they join their animal pharmaceutical company called Elanco with Dow Chemical Company, and they form Dow Elanco, which then in 1997 they sell back to Dow Chemical Company, and it becomes the Dow AgroScience Group. Then here comes Zyprexa, which is their number one schizo-bipolar, psychological medication, which one of the beautiful side effects of that is, guess what? Diabetes. All right. Then they do a couple of, cancer drugs. They do some joint ventures with some biotech companies. And then in 2002, the very first GLP-1 is approved for study, and it hits the market, called exenatide. Okay? Then, a couple years later, they go back to their, major depressive SNRI production, Cymbalta, if you remember that commercial. Its side effect is fibromyalgia, neuropathy, chronic pain, osteoarthritis. From 2011 to 2019, they, purchase various small drug manufacturers. They grow, right? In 2020 to 2022, they try and do a COVID vaccination. This is deemed a no-go by the FDA. But they get a win because in 2022 and 2023, they get Mounjaro and Zepbound approved for weight loss, which started out as, you guessed it, diabetes drugs. And this year, they signed a $1.3 billion deal with Superluminal Medications to invent and enhance small molecule drugs through AI to treat obesity, right? And there have been, in the past year, alleged bribery accusations for encouraging medical providers to prescribe Mounjaro and what's their other one name? Need to get better at, if you're going to do this, make it at least roll off the tongue, right? Like Zepbound, whatever. So, now, how do Eli Lilly and Procter & Gamble tie together? Well, Eli Lilly and Procter & Gamble both have ties to the development of what is now considered our national health institutes, including the American Heart Association, the National Institute for Health, and the National Heart Institute. So Procter & Gamble, however, did not directly fund the founding of the American Heart Institute. The American Heart Institute was, on paper, funded by about $1.5 million that were raised via public marketing. And so, Procter & Gamble didn't give them $1.5 million, but Procter & Gamble was the sponsor behind producing the marketing scheme that would raise the American Heart Association that $1.5 million to establish themselves. So, while not directly involved, they did pay for it. Just not, through the side door, right? So, now, how's that tied to Crisco? Well, Crisco, we know, is a seed oil, and we know now that seed oils are basically the bane of everybody's existence, and that they are what cause basically every problem that we face in modern society, right? They're highly processed. They are at their root a synthetic byproduct used for industrial manufacturing across basically every field imaginable. And all of the organizations that tout scientific literature or independent studies of the efficacy of these products is 9 times out of 10 funded by these large corporations. I know because I did a lot of research. So, now, why do I think that these two are in cahoots together, right? And I think it's both intentionally and unintentionally. Well, until around the early 1900s, there really were no major reported cases or incidences of diabetes globally. It was a blip on the radar when it came to causes of death, right? But there started to be a significant amount of research put into medical research around heart health and cardiovascular health. And one of the scientists that was researching into this was, what was his name? MacLeod? MacLeod? What was his name? I have to find this. Joseph MacLeod. Okay. And he started researching the pancreas and the impact of hormones and that kind of thing on heart health and cardiovascular health. And another scientist, Frederick Banting, saw his research on the pancreas and decided that he wanted to look into artificially or not artificially, but because they weren't capable of doing that just yet, because artificial insulin is a chemical process that I'll go into a little later, which makes this even more insidious because the chemical process of creating insulin is like, my God. But Frederick Banting is at the University of Toronto researching insulin and insulin production from animal products, right? And I was trying to figure out why exactly you would spend time researching and putting so much money towards diabetes when the number of cases that were and deaths that were involving diabetes, we basically have almost no documentation of this until probably the 1940s and 50s because it just wasn't a thing. So why would you research into it, right? Like it doesn't make sense from a time and effort allocation perspective, right? And at that point, there wasn't even a conception of childhood diabetes, right? Like diabetes was considered a first world, I saw the term for it someplace. It's like a first world, like civilized class, uppity up, like upper echelon of society disease because it very directly correlated with obesity. And obesity, as we know, is a direct indicator of surplus, right? Like historically, if you were obese and you were overweight, it indicated that you had a surplus of food and were capable of feeding yourself past survival, right? To the point where it became corpulence, right? So it's always been a historical indicator of surplus and indulgence and extravagance, right? Like we know this historically. So, and diabetes was directly correlated with that it was a disease of fat people. So, which makes sense that it would be then researched alongside the increasing rates of heart disease. But along this time as well, you have let's see, let me make sure that I get this right. So, all right. So around this time, there was a major change in the way that we eat culturally around the globe around this time, specifically around World War One, which was from 1914 to 1918. And during World War One, there were significant food rations, and countries were, especially in Europe, but also in the United States, due to food rationing, people were predominantly living off of carbohydrates, which we know increase cardiovascular diseases and diabetes. So, if your rates of heart attack and cardiovascular diseases are increasing, and you're also in a society where you're facing a lot of starvation, food insecurity, and your primary sources of sustenance are starches and carbohydrates and things like that rather than animal-based proteins, then you're going to have dietary and inflammation and a lot of disease problems, chronic disease problems. And especially once you start looking into, adding in things like Crisco, because of course, after Crisco started hitting the market, it was no longer the only seed oil based product alternative that was in the market. After that, you start seeing that huge uptick in synthetic margarines rather than butter, in all of these replacement foods that are allegedly more healthy than animal-based fats, which again, we know now that's not true, especially considering all of the what is it called, the oxidation that happens in all of these oils, right? Like, they're really highly unstable, and especially when you start cooking with them, they're really not great. What's the word for it? So it's omega-6 fats, but omega-6 fats are not inherently bad for you. And I'm actually going to link a video and some articles to a Dr. Mason, who talks all about seed oils and the linoleic acid and the breakdown process, and how omega-6 fatty acids that are in seed oils are absolutely not the same thing as omega-6 fatty acids that are found in animal products. All right. And from a logical perspective, like, of course they're not, right? Like, the triglycerides, the omega-6 fatty acids, B12, anything that is synthetically derived is not going to be the same as something that comes from an animal product, right? So, you have the rise of these two things simultaneously. And in 1923, they start synthetically producing insulin. And not synthetically. They don't synthetically produce insulin. When did they start? Let me look and see. Produce synthetic insulin. All right. Okay, 1978. So in 1978, they are finally able to produce synthetic insulin. Now, synthetic insulin is really terrifying because of the process that they have to go through to produce it, right? It requires a lot of synthetically produced amino acids and different nutrient things to get it to work, and like oxidization agents like urea, which is guanidinium hydrochloride, which is, it's like a, where's my note on that? I had that written down. I had it written down of what that was, but do I have it here? So it's a nitrogen-based product that's used in fertilizers and all things like that, but it's also a base product for creating synthetic insulin. Sodium sulfite as well. Then you need all of these different synthetic chemicals to break down and then reestablish this enzyme. And this is the most interesting part to me. The final injectable solution contains additional chemicals for stability and proper function, including glycerin and M-creosol. So any of you that, and disodium hydrogen phosphate dihydrate. So I could have sworn I had those written down here someplace as my important terms to remember. But I have so many mismatched little pages of stuff, it's hard to remember. I definitely looked up who is this. So creosol is a compound that is used as an intermediate in the production of other chemicals. It is used for disinfectants, resins, and explosives. It's hazardous, causes skin, eye, and respiratory irritation, and can be toxic if ingested. So it's not good for you. And if you've ever heard of creosol treated wood, you don't want to burn it because it will fuck you up. But yeah, so creating synthetic insulin has a lot of these different chemical compounds in order to formulate it, which are, of course, created, sold, and manufactured by the lovely people at BASF. And, they do Dow DuPont Chemical Company. Who is that other one? Who's that lovely other one? I know there's another one in here. Who is that one? There's so many of them that have their hands in here. It's ridiculous. Sigma Aldrich, that Merrick group again. So, and the not just in insulin. So first off, the other side effect of insulin is that it causes weight gain. So not only are you introducing into society and culture artificial seed oils and things like Crisco and margarine and vegetable oil. Where's my list of seed oils? Archer Daniel Midlands as well. So canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, cottonseed oil, all of those. Once you have, those starting to enter into the social lexicon and diet, and then you also have an uptick, which is going to cause, so introducing hydrogenated oils and synthetic oils is going to cause obesity. And then on top of that, obesity causes a rise in diabetes, which if you're the largest manufacturer of insulin, you're definitely not going to have a problem with because you're going to sell more insulin. And side effect of insulin is that it makes you gain weight. So you have these two correlating growth spikes of synthetic oils in the market for food, and then also the rise of insulin use, which is going to make you fatter. So both of these things are happening simultaneously. Then we have, in 1969, in the 60s, there were a lot of different health movements, a lot of it driven by John F. Kennedy, who a lot of his political campaign was based around bringing health back to the nation. And he was already seeing at when he was running for president and during his presidency, this uptick in obesity, childhood obesity, and just obesity in the United States. So he started this health conscious movement in the 60s. And in, of course, contrast to that, you have the lovely Bill Fabry, who frankly, dears, was a fat, overweight man who was mad that his fat, overweight wife was judged for being fat and overweight and couldn't find clothes that fit her. So, unhappy man has an unhappy wife, and so he founds the National Association for Advancing Fat Acceptance. All right? That's the history of it. You can try and gussy it up all you want, but what it boils down to is that this big old dude, who's still a big dude, all right? He is still not small, all right? Big dude, mad because his wife is mad because she can't find clothes that fit her. So, and he also saw a fat inn in the Central Park, which personally, when I read about it, the fat inn, I think based off of who was hosting it and what it was, it seemed like a satirical poking fun at the whole anti-diet movement. Because that's what all of this was this anti-diet movement that started in reaction to the health craze of the 60s that was spurned by JFK saying that, hey, we're getting fat and unhealthy, we need to fix it, right? So the NAAFA is founded, and there are a lot of anti-diet. That's the beginning of the anti-diet movement, right? But around that time as well is when the JFK election was the first nationally televised election, and by that point most Americans had a TV in their house, and TV advertising at that time ended up being a huge mover for specifically companies like Crisco, who again Procter & Gamble paved the way with soap operas, which were called soap operas because they were sponsored by soap manufacturers to sell, you guessed it, soap. So, marketing changes, and you have people like Albert Lasker, who started the Lasker Foundation, who they're sketchy too, but the Lasker Foundation was founded by Albert Lasker, who was a major advertising executive who went on to own the White Sox and build Wrigley Stadium, and he had a major hand in the development of the American Heart Association, the National Heart Institute, and the Lasker Foundation has successfully funded a lot of biochemical research. So, now, how do we tie all of this fun, body positive, this anti-diet movement and the NAFA and all of that, and our Eli Lilly insulin stuff, and Procter & Gamble and their soap, how do we tie that to what we now know as the body positivity movement? Well, I got you. This is where our phenomenal friends at Unilever come in, okay? Because Unilever owns Dove. And in 2005, Dove breaks ground being the first company to launch body positive marketing campaigns. Now, why is this important? Because the key ingredient in Dove body products is sodium palmate, which is, you guessed it, palm oil derivative, all right? And their second most used ingredient is sodium lauryl isothionate, which is again produced by our phenomenal German friends, BASF. Now, Dove is owned by Unilever, and Unilever also owns Ben & Jerry's. They, as a matter of fact, are one of the, let's see, I think they are the second largest let's see, market share. So they have a dominant position in the U.S. ice cream market with 25% of the market share. It's the number one in consumer products in Thailand. I believe yeah. And Unilever is a let's see, what size are they right now? So they are a $60 billion and change company right now. So, and they own everything from Ben and Jerry's, Hellmann's, Knorr, and they also do dairy products, ice cream. I don't think that they have a list available of like all of their brands. Axe body spray, Ben and Jerry's, Life Buoy, which is a British soap making company. But our biggest ones that we're concerned with are Magnum ice cream, Ben and Jerry's, Hellmann's, and Dove body wash, right? Predominantly because Dove body wash was the innovator. Well, I say innovator. They were the leader in capitalizing on this anti-diet movement and doing body positive, we're going to call it what it is. It's fat acceptance marketing, all right? And that's how all of that is tied up in this pretty little bow, right? So 2004, Dove starts their body positivity campaign and fat acceptance, right? And as we know, with the fat acceptance movement, it really took off in like 2010 to 2014 with the mass democratization and kind of mass spread of social media with things like Instagram, and now with the rise of TikTok, right? So you saw this huge influx of influencers and brands that were championing this fat acceptance movement, and vast majority of them are funded by Unilever and these other companies, right? So they have a vested interest in you gaining, and my theory is that with this rise of, and again, so 2004, Dove launches their body positivity campaign, okay? And then in 2008, the very first, no, actually, it was 2 years before. So 2 years before the Dove, what did they call it? What was it? Dove Real Beauty campaign comes out. In 2002, Eli Lilly's very first GLP-1 is approved. All right. So I think that all of these companies, based off of who their chemical suppliers are, what the chemical content of their food, their drugs, everything is all designed around perpetuating that and selling you more. Right? So sell you more food, sell you more things, encourage you that, big is beautiful, fat is amazing, and you should eat as many seed oils as you want. It's great for you. And that we're also going to sell you a insulin-based shot that will help you get skinny. Right? Now, how does this get even more toxic, confusing, terrifying, and rabbit holey? Well, that BASF that I keep talking about is the largest chemical manufacturer in the world, and they're based out of Germany, and they are a petrochemical, performance material, resins, and nutritional chemicals and agro solutions company. All right. Like I said, they are the predominant supplier of sodium palmate for soaps. It's a palm oil derivative, and Unilever buys those. They are the primary supplier of sodium lauryl isothiolate, which also goes into beauty products. And then when it comes to GLP-1, So Novo Nordisk is also involved in this because there are there's four different scientists that have been credited with the discovery and development of GLP-1s. There is Joel Habner, who is associated with Massachusetts General Hospital. There's Svetlana Mojaz. I don't know if I pronounced that right. She is associated with Rockefeller University. There is Lottie Berge Kunsen with Novo Nordisk, and Jens Jule Holst, also significantly funded by Novo Nordisk beginning in 2010. All right, so all the way back from 2002, Eli Lilly, and then in the 1980s is when these Joel Habner and Svetlana Mojaz first discovered GLP-1. So we've known about the GLP-1 since the 1980s. And like I said, it took however long, and then in 2002 it was finally approved for production for Eli Lilly by the FDA. Now, the sneaky little bit about those particular scientists are their connections with Massachusetts General Hospital, Rockefeller University, and Harvard. Because Harvard, Massachusetts General Hospital, and Harvard and the Massachusetts General Hospital all receive significant funding from the Rockefeller University. 15% of Rockefeller University's endowment goes to Harvard. 65% of their overall endowment expenditure goes towards Harvard, Columbia, SUNY, Stanford, MIT, Cornell, and Oxford. So Rockefeller University has a significant hand in funding this particular type of research. And Mass General Hospital has now come out with recent alleged medical journalism that is pro anti-diet and pro fat positive movement, which, I mean, hey, right? I have to look back into that. All right. Now, not only do, all of these scientists and everything have, significant financial ties to these larger institutions, but those larger institutions also receive a significant amount of funding from companies like BASF. Now, how does BASF tie into GLP-1s? Well, BASF is the primary supplier of the nitrogen source for GLP-1 development, which is ammonium sulfate. So, yeah. They're also a major producer of mono and diglycerides. BASF and DuPont are major producers of that, which are one of the main ingredients in Crisco and other vegetable oils. This largest producer of palm oil is Cargill. Cargill is the largest privately owned corporation in the United States. They also are one of the largest, Cargill is one of the largest producers of soybean oil. And palm oil, soybean oil, and mono and diglycerides are the three ingredients to Crisco, which all of those ingredients are produced by either Cargill or the BASF or Daniel Midland. So, and all of those companies have significant interests in cotton production, cottonseed oil, and so, there's sticky fingers involved in all of this. Now, so my main point with this is we now know in this day and age that seed oils are bad for you. All right, we know that. Stop lying to yourself. We know they are. Basically, 95% of the grocery store is trying to kill you, and it's owned by these major corporations, right? Like, top processed food companies. So, Nestle, Pepsi, Kraft Heinz, General Mills, all of these, Tyson's, Tyson's Food does processed meats, Unilever, Cargill. So Cargill is one of the world's largest food and agribusiness companies. Unilever. So all of these companies have a vested interest in making sure that you continue to eat their seed oils and then continue to buy their lovely weight loss drugs that happen to be insulin based, and that diabetes happens to be deeply tied to obesity. And guess what causes obesity? Insulin and seed oils. So, and guess what their primary ingredient is on all of the foods? Seed oils. And all of the chemical components are all produced and provided by the same, like, 2 or 3 chemical production companies. But sure, it all just naturally happened to where food companies were telling you, eat all of this, fat is beautiful, big is beautiful, fat acceptance, and then a couple decades down, or a decade down the road, here you go, here's our wonderful new drug that you can take so that you lose weight and you can still keep eating all of our stuff. And all of these side effects where your eyeballs might fall out, you lose your intestines through your booty hole. But sure, it's definitely in your best interest, and they totally care about you. And all of those pharmacological and scientific organizations that they put a lot of money into as grant giving and financial donations for tax write-offs are absolutely making the best possible choices for you. And if you really wanted to get into it with the health organizations, there's a lot of sticky wickets in there too. There really are. I mean, the Lasker Foundation, the Rockefeller University, the Warren Alpert Foundation. All of them. All of them have ties to BlackRock, Bloomberg, Vanguard, all of them, every single one of them. So hopefully that made sense. We got it in under an hour, but that is my timeline thesis. I'm sure, like most things that I do, it was completely incoherent, but hopefully I made my point. All of these companies have a vested interest in continuing to develop products that keep you fat and unhappy. Okay? Because Eli Lilly, what is their bread and butter? Their bread and butter is drugs like SSRIs and depression medications and insulin. All right? Which insulin makes you fat, insulin and being fat makes you depressed, and being depressed makes you fat. All of these like depressed drugs, they also cause weight gain, and we know for a fact that an enormous amount of inflammatory diseases are caused by what you eat. And if you're eating industrial lubricants, then yeah, of course you're going to have some problems. But anyway, hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, well, whatever. Okay? And we will circle back. And the last thing that I forgot to add that just wraps up my whole, they're trying to keep you fat and unhappy, okay? Fat is disgusting. Or Land Whales Incorporated, okay? Is most of these large corporations have significant financial ties to supporting the OAC, which is the Obesity Action Committee. So PepsiCo has anti-soda No. They have lobbying. Well, I mean, all of these places lobby, but they donated to, they lobby to block regulations on sugary drinks, framing them as personal choice amid body positivity. And they funded grants to charities to build goodwill while promoting high sugar products, and shifting responsibility to consumers. Coca-Cola, grants to anti-obesity charities, and quote-unquote real magic ads with diverse bodies. Sponsored events like the Congressional Black Caucus while opposing soda taxes. Ads feature plus-size models while enjoying Coke, tying self-indulgence to self-love. Sales tie-ins with wellness influencers normalizing calories. Then you have General Mills, who owns Cheerios, Betty Crocker, General Mills. We all know General Mills. They paid dietitians for all foods have value messaging. They hire influencers to promote anti-diet rhetoric while showcasing sugary cereals and snacks. They co-opt anti-diet movements to sell guilt-free ultra-processed foods. Then Unilever, who owns Ben & Jerry's and Magnum ice cream, invests in fat-burning supplements via Unilever Ventures. Funds body positivity influencers for indulgent ads. They own supplement lines that exploit acceptance by promising easy fixes. Create a dual revenue stream for junk food and related fat loss products, which actually there is zero scientific evidence that any of these supplements, if it's got a supplement in the name, there's zero scientific evidence that it works at all. Nutritional supplement, fat loss supplement, like there's zero scientific data that supports any of it being bioavailable to you as a supplement. But do you know where you can get bioavailable everything that you need? Beef. Eat beef. It's got it all. B12 and the correct amount of omegas. Omega-6 and omega-3. Yeah, it's the only way to get bioavailable B12. All right, now major drug companies and their strategies, okay? Wait. Okay, so then you've got Yum Brands, which includes KFC, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell's. They have no apology promotions and pink bucket tie-ins with Susan G. Komen. Ads like Pizza Hut's no apologies for desserts frame overeating as empowering. They have partnerships with health charities, like Pink Fried Chicken for breast cancer, which blend acceptance with high-fat marketing. Nestle, investment in obesity-related pharma, diabetes foods, profits from ultra-processed snacks while funding anti-stigma research. Dual models sell obesogenic products in medical foods for resulting conditions like diabetes. See, we know that diabetes is intrinsically linked to obesity, all right? And what did they do? They created a product that does nothing but make you obese, okay? If you're gonna eat fat, eat animal fat. Don't be eating these synthetic fats. Stop with the seed oil. They want you fat and unhappy, baby. That's why the whole marketing thing and the American Heart Association trying to convince you that animal fats are bad for you. No, it was a nationally organized marketing scheme that came about because they were trying to offload grains onto the American public because they had a surplus and they had to figure out what to do with it so that they didn't have a loss. Okay, so they came up with the food pyramid. That's what it was. All right, between the food pyramid telling you that carbohydrates are good and there's such a thing as like a difference between highly processed carbohydrates and like whole grains. No, baby, they all break down into the same thing, glucose. And what does that do? It makes you fat and it makes you insulin resistant, which then makes you require diabetes drugs. Funny how that works, ain't it? All right. Anyways, major drug companies and their strategies. So pharma's approach is more direct, funding obesity as a chronic disease narratives to destigmatize fatness, paving the way for drug sales projected to be a $100 billion market by 2030. Okay, these are companies that are about 85 billion right now. No, that's Archer Daniel Midlands. They're a lot bigger than Procter and Gamble and Eli Lilly. So Eli Lilly is a $45 billion company, and Procter Gamble is an $84 billion company, but it's projected to be $100 billion plus by 2030. And if they can increase that by making more people fat, then why wouldn't they? Because I have already laid out in the hour before this that everything is interconnected. The food that they're feeding you and the drugs that they're cooking up are all designed to make you fat and unhappy, so that they can then sell you drugs to fix your depression. So, obesity is a chronic disease narratives to destigmatize fatness, paving the way for drug sales. They sponsor panels, influencers, and groups like the Obesity Action Coalition. All of these companies are literally creating these coalitions and like nonpartisan think tank research groups and advocacy groups. And baby, look at who's paying them. Look at who's paying these little advocacy groups, because the paycheck has got to come from somewhere, and it's coming from Archer Daniel Midlands, it's coming from BASF, it's coming from Eli Lilly, like, is coming, okay? They promote size acceptance and advocating Medicare coverage for injectables because, of course, the insurance companies are tied into this, all right? Look into AIG. This creates a paradox, promoting acceptance to sell weight loss solutions, because of course it does. So Novo Nordisk, they sponsor Obesity Action Coalition panels on body positivity. They fund Congressional Black Caucus events. They partner with influencers and spend $1 million plus annually on Obesity Action Coalition support for anti-stigma advocacy. They court Black leaders for Medicare coverage. They frame obesity as an untreatable without drugs and target body positive influencers for subtle promotion sparking backlash, because of course, like, you are the manufacturer of this weight loss drug and you're paying people to be fat and to advocate for using your fat loss drug. Like, please. Eli Lilly, they also fund the Obesity Action Coalition. They have ESG messaging on obesity stigma. They back anti-bias campaigns while launching GLP-1 drugs and using social media for body diversity posts to normalize treatment needs, driving $1 billion plus quarterly sales. That's in a quarter. They're adding $4 billion annually by selling you Mounjaro, okay? Weight Watchers, it's now under a private equity firm, but it's Pharmatide. Wellness That Works, which, no, it doesn't. It dropped weight from the name and adopted anti-diet language and partners with GLP-1 makers for hybrid programs, co-opting acceptance to sell subscriptions and drug combos. Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Roche, and GSK also fund anti-obesity research and development, while funding indirect stigma reduction via trials, and invest in next generation drugs like oral GLP-1s, and fund research framing obesity as genetic and chronic versus something that's related to the food that they're feeding you. All right. And reducing calls for food regulation, because of course they don't want their chemicals regulated, right? Because then they wouldn't be able to get you to eat as much of it. All right. And pharma's influence extends to media. We know this because we see the pharmaceutical ads and see that AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Lilly, Novo Nordisk, they all sponsor most of the TV programs that are on TV, including your news representation. They appear in 120 times more stories than true anti-bias coverage and this is according to the National Association for Advancing Fat Acceptance, okay? So the National Association for Advancing Fat Acceptance has pointed out that they are behind the funding for a lot of this. So it's like the fats know that it's unbiased. Broader implications. Food firms fueling obesity, pharma profiting from cures, exploits fat acceptance for a $1.5 trillion plus $1.5 trillion in global obesity economy. Okay. And then, of course, NAFA is out here saying that it tokenizes larger bodies, but like whatever, and ignores health inequities. There is no health inequity. The health inequity is that you are lazy and you don't want to go out and change your life because it's hard, okay? And I get it. It's hard, it's difficult, but baby, it's up to you. You cannot depend on these drug companies who make their money and fund their business off of making sure that you do not get well, right? But anyways, that's my little spiel on Fat is Disgusting or Land Whales Incorporated. Bye.